Well, it's great to be with you all, and thank you so much, Jack, for that and for bringing me here today. And I really appreciate all of you who are hosting us, and Jessica and uh, your team. I'm an old country boy, grew up plowing mules and driving tractors, but I always wanted to fly. From the time I was 5 years old, when we went to had a picnic down on Sunday after church, went down to the Athens Memorial Park, and they had a World War II fighter plane there. And my dad picked me up and set me on the wing, and I went over and looked in the cockpit, and I said, "This is me." And I passed when I went to the University of Georgia, I passed the physical sophomore year. I was in ROTC. Every male had to be in ROTC back then, because if you went to a state university, across the country, every male had to be in ROTC for 2 years. So we had Army and Air Force at Georgia, and I, of course, went in the Air Force. And in my sophomore year, they said, "You want to be in the Air Force?" And I said, "Yes." And so I took the test and passed it, and I took the physical and passed it for the flying group. And so then I went 2 more years of ROTC while I was at Georgia. And I was the worst student ever to graduate in 4 years at the University of Georgia, but I was a distinguished graduate of ROTC. And I got a regular commission. And I went to flight school with half of the academy guys. There were more than 50% of the academy guys in my class. And then this was August 1966, and more than half of us in our class got assigned F-4 Phantom pipeline Southeast Asia, which meant the war was building up in Southeast Asia, in Vietnam, and we were going to go pipeline. That meant you're going to get combat trained and then go straight over to Vietnam. And that's what I did. So within a few months, a year, or less than a year, I was in Vietnam. And on my 53rd mission, my airplane blew up. We were getting shot at. We were bombing there. They were bringing, we mainly bombed to get them to stop bringing troops and maintenance or materials into the South Vietnam to attack the South Vietnamese. So that's what we were doing. Now, was the strategy proper, best? No. I had been there 3 months. I was 23 years old, and I knew this was not the way to win the war. But the Secretary of Defense back in Washington, D.C., was telling us which places to bomb and where to bomb them. And he had never been in the military. So that's interesting. You got to delegate. This is what he's talking about here. You got to have people prepared and tell them what to do overall, the big mission, and let them do it, accomplish it. Because when you're away from the environment of what that mission is going to be, you don't know everything, and you got to trust them. So anyway, but I spent 5.5 years there, and I was the third youngest guy who's still alive. I probably was the third youngest guy of the 5 to 8 year POWs. Now the bombing stopped in '68, and we didn't have any more POWs for almost 3 years. Okay, so a 5 to 8 year group, and then there was a small group that came in '72 when the bombing started again. The war ended in January '73, and then we came home in 60 days after that. So I was the third youngest guy, and usually the youngest guy in some of the camps. That we had several camps around Hanoi, and I was very fortunate to have good leadership, and I was locked in a cell 6.5 by 7 feet for the first 8 months in Hanoi, in the Hanoi Hilton, which is what the name we gave it. It was the Hoa Lo, which was the French built that prison in the 1890s. It had 14-foot walls around it and several 3-feet walls around it, and no one ever escaped from that prison. And that's where we went, first 8.5 months there. And I was in this cell, small cell, tiny cell. It was about the size of a bathroom in a gas station on the highway in Georgia out here somewhere. You know, it was 6.5 by 7 feet. And there's 4 of us in that cell for the next 8.5 months. Well, you know, when I was captured, I did my parachute landing fall, and I hit all the 5 points that I was supposed to hit, and I wasn't badly injured. I didn't feel injured at the time. Now, my head was bent down like that because I went through 20 G's as I ejected from the airplane, and that night, my head was just hardly could lift it up, and I had a big cut here and a big cut here, but I was okay. And there's 3 or 4 militia guys coming at me, and I jumped in a bomb crater, old bomb crater, and I pulled out my radio. Back then we had a battery-powered radio for emergency, and I said, I'm 200 meters north of the river, start strafing at 300, I'm headed south to the river, because this river emptied into the Gulf of Tonkin. And I wanted to get there and just get rescued. Well, they started closing in, 3 or 4 guys started closing in, and I disconnected my parachute. I pulled out my .38 pistol. I had 2 rounds of tracer and 3 rounds of ball and nothing under the hammer. It was a revolver. And I decided, we had been trained in survival school that these guys, the militia is not all that well trained, so try to escape. And I fired a round of tracer right over their heads, and they didn't flinch. I thought I just wanted to run them away, you know, and I'd get in the river. Well, they didn't flinch, and one guy picked up several of them picked up pointed their rifles at me, and one guy pulled out a little paper in his pocket, and he said, in phonetics, he was reading phonetics, it was for them, hands up, surrender, no die. And I thought, that's probably a good idea. And I threw away my pistol, put my hands up, and they captured me. And, you know, they should have shot me. They really should have shot me. And they captured me, and I was up until that point, mind was working greatly, and but from that point, I went into shock. And they blindfolded me, they tied my hands behind my back, and they put a rope around my neck where they could lead me around like a dog, and they took me over to the next village. And anyway, it took me 2 weeks to get to Hanoi, but I realized right away, and the guy that was a militia guy that was in charge of taking me north toward Hanoi, we were in the southern part of North Vietnam, so we were a long ways from Hanoi. He was in charge, but he was a good soldier, and he would not let them beat me up. He would not let the local population, and the communists would get out there in a little village with a bullhorn, and they'd try to come beat me up, and he would push them back, he and his soldiers. And so I'd been a Christian all my life, and I just knew that God had a place for me, and he was going to keep me alive. And I'd lost 2 roommates prior to my shoot down, and they didn't come home. And so I got to Hanoi, and I went in that 6.5 by 7 foot cell, and I had a leader for the next 3 years that was New York State wrestling champion in high school, and he was tougher than I was, and I wanted to be like him. And initially I wanted to be like him in every way. But after living with him for several months and years, I lived with him for 3 years, 5 years. Actually, he was my boss for 3 years. But he wasn't perfect, but he was mighty good. And he was the perfect guy to be a leader in that situation. And he set a good example for me, and I wanted to be like him. So what I'm saying is, your people are going to look to you, and if you have strength and courage and live with honor and listen to them also, they're going to want to serve you, and they want to be like you. And with that, I'll sit down.
All right.